The main idea of the United States Constitution, which was ratified in 1788, was to limit the powers of the federal government. For the first time in history, the powers of a national government were limited to a list of enumerated powers. Article 1, Section 8 lists these powers, for example, to coin money, to issue patents, to declare war, to support an army and navy. A Bill of Rights was added at the insistence of those who feared federal power. The Bill of Rights was considered an ironclad guarantee that the federal government would not expand its powers beyond those listed in Article 1, Section 8. The 10th Amendment in the Bill of Rights provides that any powers not specifically delegated to the United States are reserved to the states and to the people. Limiting the powers of the federal government to a list of specific powers is known as the doctrine of enumerated powers. By limiting the powers of the federal and state governments, the Founding Fathers created the freest and most capitalistic country to ever exist in the world. Many Americans do not realize what a radical idea the Constitution was. For the first time in history, a government was established which guaranteed property rights and which limited the powers of the government to specific enumerated powers. The economic results of creating the world's freest country would transform the world. Inventions in the fields of agriculture, manufacturing, transportation, communication, and medicine would increase the wealth and productivity of the world more than all the inventions in prior history. For 150 years, from 1788 to 1937, the Supreme Court limited the powers of the federal government to those enumerated in the Constitution. The 10th Amendment was enforced as written and as originally intended, reserving all powers not specifically granted to the federal government to the states and to the people. In 1913, the federal government took control of the nation's money supply by establishing the Federal Reserve System. Misguided policies of easy money in the 1920s and very tight money in the 1930s resulted in the Great Depression. To deal with the Depression, President Roosevelt wanted to expand the powers of the federal government, but was prevented from doing so by the Supreme Court. New Deal programs, including much of the National Industrial Recovery Act, were held to be unconstitutional by votes of 5-4. In 1937, FDR appointed named Hugo Black. After Black's appointment, the balance of power on the court tipped, and the court began to uphold laws giving the federal government powers beyond those enumerated in the Constitution. The Supreme Court held that Congress's power to regulate interstate commerce gave Congress the power to pass laws in any area that affected commerce, however slightly or remotely. For example, a farmer planted more wheat than allowed by federal law. When the farmer appeared in court, he was able to show that he and his family consumed all the wheat grown on the farm. None was sold in commerce. It doesn't matter, the Supreme Court ruled. If the farmer had planted less, he may have been forced to buy some elsewhere, thereby lowering the wheat supply and raising the price of wheat as the government wished. Since the farmer's actions affected commerce, no matter how remotely, he was subject to the federal commerce power. As another example, if you own a restaurant and the tables or plates or stoves or food or anything in the restaurant comes from another state, your restaurant is in interstate commerce and subject to any controls the federal government may wish to impose. The scope of the Commerce Clause has been expanded far beyond what the Founding Fathers intended. Congress can now pass laws regulating virtually any economic activity, and the Supreme Court will uphold the law's constitutionality as a matter of course. The Supreme Court no longer enforces the doctrine of enumerated powers or the 10th Amendment guarantee that federal powers are limited to those specific powers listed in the Constitution. In 1937, the United States ceased to be a constitutional republic characterized by limited enumerated powers and became a democracy subject to majority rule.